Hello everyone. In the previous weeks, we have been talking about the history of Sanskrit kāvya and kāvyaśāstra. We saw the origin and development of Sanskrit poetry and literary theory in detail. In this lecture, we are going to see the idea of reader in Sanskrit kāvya tradition. You need to remember that it is impossible to come up with a monolithic figure of a reader from Sanskrit literary culture. So, in this lecture, we will be primarily trying to identify the figure of the reader that we can see in literary productions as well as literary theory. In Sanskrit, the term sahrudaya is popularly used to refer to the idea of a reader. Although words such as anuvachaka, rasika and so on are also used to refer to the readers. The word sahrudaya literally means somebody with a responsive heart. According to Abhinavagupta, the term sahrudaya is used to denote persons who are capable of identifying with the subject matter as the mirror of their hearts has been polished by the constant study and practice of poetry, and who respond to it sympathetically in their own hearts. He says this in Lojana. What this definition of sahrudaya given by Abhinava shows is that sahrudaya needs to possess reasonably good knowledge about the technicalities of poetic composition, even if he or she is not going to compose a poem, so as to identify and effectively appreciate the poetic techniques employed or used by the creative writer. Leonhardt's observation in his A History of Classical Poetry, Sanskrit, Pali and Prakrit is a case in point here. He says, the ability to enjoy kāvya presupposed mainly adequate learning and familiarity with the special nature of literary texts. He continues, the reader or listener had a command not only of the literary language, its means of expression and style, but was also familiar with the sources and techniques of poetry. He also had a good knowledge of metrics, decorative figures or alankaras, the theory of the sentiments or rasa, and the implied or dhvani. Indeed, he might even be a specialist in some other branches of science as well. The readers, who the literary theoreticians call by names such as sahrudaya or the congenial reader, rasajna or rasiga or the connoisseur of sentiment, or sat, vidat, sudhi or vidakha, or the knowledgeable are the experienced critics who are capable of discovering the special qualities that a poem or the listener wishes to emphasize by paying close attention to the handling of details. The scholar readers had a command not only of literary language or its means of expression and style, but they were also familiar with the sources and techniques of poetry. Naturally, he knew the epics, the Puranas, which were rich mines of all sorts of themes of major form of kāvya. He also had knowledge of metrics or chandas, alankaras or figures of speech, rasas or aesthetic emotion. Needless to say, he must have been a very good connoisseur in the other forms of art and branches of knowledge as well. Leonhard observes that he possessed the measure of general knowledge that was the prerequisite for an appreciation of classical poetry. This appreciation was to some extent recognition of the norms that were applied by the poet at any time, which being part of the poetic canon were the most important tools in the hands of the poet and the reader alike. So, Vishwanatha's observation in Sahitya Darpana about a rasika or a reader capable of enjoying rasa is also important in this context. For Vishwanatha, a rasika's ability to enjoy rasa is simultaneously the result of his predilection for art or vasana that comes not only from his birth but from the previous births as well. In the present birth, one develops this special mindset to enjoy rasa through one's constant study of literary works. If the study of literature were not necessary to relish aesthetic emotion, Vishwanatha notes, even the theologians versed in the Vedas and the students of logic would have been able to savor rasa. According to him, if we do not consider one's predisposition towards form, art from the previous birth as an important causal force for being a sahrudaya, we will not be able to explain why some students of kāvya are incapable of relishing rasa despite their constant endeavors to do so. Quoting Dharmadatta, Vishwanatha opines that a person without these prerequisites for being a rasika remains as insensitive as the woodwork, the walls and the stones in the theatre. It's a very important observation. Sanskrit poets and literary theoreticians often hold the view that an author's worth is always and can only be judged by an able reader. For example, Kalidasa in both the Raghuvamsha and Abhijnana Shakuntala talks about the importance of a learned reader in judging the creativity of a poet. In Raghuvamsha, Kalidasa says that just as gold is tested with the help of a touchstone, so also the heart of a sensitive reader functions as a means to judge the quality of a poem. In Abhijnana Shakuntala, he opines that a drama cannot be deemed successful until and unless it is well appreciated by the connoisseurs of art. Further emphasizing the importance of the reader in the appreciation of creative artifacts, the 8th century poet and playwright Bhavabhudi in his play Maladi Madhava says that a reader who can properly appreciate his poetic merit and identify with his creative heart or samana hrudaya is yet to be born. According to Rajashekhara, only a good reader can understand the effort and intention of a poet. In the absence of a good reader, all efforts of a poet go in vain. Rajashekhara further points out that a good reader is the master, friend and preceptor, minister and disciple to the poet. Anandavardhana, in his lost work Vishamabana Leela, opines that the actualization of kāvya happens only in the presence of sahrudayas or men of taste, just as a lotus blooms when graced by the rays of the sun. He says, virtues blossom when admired by men of taste. When graced by the sun's rays, a lotus becomes a lotus. In another poem, often attributed to Kalidasa, the speaker makes a strong plea to the Lord Brahma to spare him from the punishment of presenting his poem to an insensitive listener or arasika. It goes, Arasigeshu kavida nivedanam shirasi ma likha. Acknowledging the importance of a sahrudaya in the appreciation of a work of art, another anonymous poet declares that the act of poet appreciating his work of art is as inappropriate as a father appreciating the beauty of his daughter. The poem says that although a poet is the creator of a text, its merit has to be ultimately judged by the readers erudite in kāvyaśāstra. The actual shloka goes like this. Kavi karodi kāvyāni swadam janadi pandidaha saundaryam api lavanyam padir janadi no pita. So, for Abhinavagupta, the essential quality of a responsive reader or sahrudaya is his ability to identify with the heart of the poet or the creator. Abhinavagupta, in his commentary on Bharata's Natyashastra, opines that when a signification charged with rasa flashes through the heart of a sahrudaya, responsive reader, it pervades his body just as dry wood catches fire. He mentions this in Abhinava Bharati. Abhinava also talks about the impediments or viknas that can play havoc with a sahrudaya's relishing of aesthetic emotions. These impediments include the feeling that what is presented in kāvya is not likely to happen, the generation of actual emotions instead of aesthetic emotions during the aesthetic experience, the reader's immersion in his own personal problems. Absence of aesthetic elements which lead to the production of rasa. Obscurity in the representation of aesthetic elements. Lack of a predominant aesthetic emotion or subject matter. And the doubt in the reader's mind regarding the rasa that a particular vibhava, etc. are trying to generate in a work of art. According to Rajashekhara, a reader's capacity to appreciate a poem is called kāvyaśāstra pratibha. In Kavya Mimamsa, Rajashekhara divides the readers of Kavya into 4 broad categories on the basis of their ability to appreciate a poem. And it goes: insensitive readers, sensitive but indiscriminate readers, competitive readers, and the true readers. The insensitive readers are those who are innately uninterested in enjoying a work of art. The sensitive but indiscriminate readers like to read everything that comes to them, but they lack the ability to judge the true poetic merit of a work. The competitive readers are always jealous of good poets. Although they understand the real worth of a poem, they are very much reluctant to accept it. The last category, that is the true readers who can appreciate a poem properly, is an extremely rare category. According to Rajashekhara, grief-stricken is the heart of a poet who is unable to find a good reader. Only those who are fortunate come by a good reader who can analyze the word construction, exult at the poetic fancies, and finally unearth the profound meaning of a work. As far as Rajashekhara is concerned, a good reader who can meaningfully critique the work of a poet is simultaneously a master, a friend, a counselor, a pupil, and a teacher to the poet. Rajashekhara opines that both the poet and the connoisseur of art possess the poetic imagination or pratibha. Pratibha in the poet is creative or kāryatri, whereas pratibha in the reader is imaginatively recreative or bhavayatri. So, one might say that a kāvya is twice born. First, at the level of the poet, when his creative imagination conceives it, and then at the level of the reader who brings to life the same poem by his power of imagination, known as bhavayatri pratibha. So the ultimate wish of a poet is to come across a reader who is able to appreciate the worth of his poetic genius. A poet who is not fortunate to get a reader who understands the former's effort and genius continue to remain grief-stricken. It is important to note that this fascination for an ideal reader is not something that we come across in the treatises on literary theory alone. We have stories of great poets leaving their hometown in search of critics of great talent who can appreciate their poems. A case in point is the 12th century poet and philosopher Sriharsha, the author of what is often considered the last of the great courtly epics in Sanskrit, the Nishadiya Charita, or the life of Nala, king of Nishadiya. Vidyapati, in his Purusha Pariksha, presents Sriharsha as someone who left Bengal for the city of Varanasi in search of a sahrudaya. Vidyapati says, Sriharsha, upon realizing that gold is tested in fire and poetry in the assembly of literary critics, what use is his poem to a poet if the experts do not esteem it, left Bengal for the famed literary circle of Varanasi, taking his poem with him. There he recited it to a scholar named Koka. Every day when the scholar would set off for his midday ablutions, he would hear Sriharsha reciting his poem as he followed behind. But never receiving any response, Sriharsha one day spoke up. Dear sir, I took great pains with this poem and travelled a great distance to come to you, despite my love for my native land, so that you could judge it. I follow behind you as you walk along the way, reciting it in hopes of finding out what is or is not commendable in it. But good sir, you neither praise nor blame it. I have to think you are not even listening. Koga replied, how can you say I have not been listening? On the contrary, I have heard the whole thing and will tell you in detail what I have determined about correcting the entire work through a full analysis of its words and meanings. I am not speaking from mere impressions. Rather, I listen to the entire poem and have it all by my heart. If you don't believe me, just listen. He then recited all the verses he had heard over the entire preceding month. Sriharsha listened with joy and amazement and fell at his feet. This shows that validation from a learned reader was always necessary for a poet to establish himself as a good poet. So far, we have been primarily talking about the receptive readers who can evaluate the merit of a poem and by extension, pratibha or the genius of the poet. Does it mean that Kavya was being written only for these connoisseurs of art? No. Kavya was also written for the ordinary readers who had no knowledge about the technicalities underpinning a poetic composition. These ordinary readers are not doshajnas. They are reading kavyas to primarily enjoy or relish aesthetic emotions. Literary critics opine that along with enjoying the aesthetic pleasure, the readers of kavya will also get instructed in purusharthas or the object of human pursuits. Bhamaha, who is considered the founding father of kāvyaśāstra in Sanskrit, shares the opinion of Bharata. According to Bhamaha, composition of good poetry produces in readers ability in dharma, artha, kama and moksha. In his commentary upon Utpada's Kāvyaśāstra Sara Samgraha, Pradhiharendu Raja also opines that rasa is indeed a source of instruction for the readers. Rudrada in Kāvyaśāstra in fact privileges the deontic function of kavya over its aesthetic function. He often says that does not the knowledge of dharma or righteousness, artha or wealth, kama or joy, moksha or salvation reach sensitive minds easily and pleasingly through poetry? People are always wary of shastras, therefore poetry contains rasa to serve the purpose of shastras in a joyous manner. This is not an isolated opinion, in fact. Abhinavagupta, in his Lojana on Anandavarthana's Dhvanyaloka, says that the study of good poetry gives readers skill in dharma, artha, kama and moksha. In Vakrokti Jivita, Kundaga also sees rasa as a means to instruct readers about the four ends of life in a way that is conspicuously distinct from Shastras, Puranas and the Veda. Kundaga's position is that while the Shastra and the other allied disciplines talk about the moral duties incumbent upon men in an insipid way, Kavya performs the same function in a very pleasurable manner. Kundaga says, literary artifacts such as Mahakavya create pleasure in the nobles. The noble persons like princes are supposed to learn the ends of life such as dharma, but being fickle and joyous by nature, they are reluctant to take an effort to learn them. Kavya will be like a toy to them. Therefore, they can learn dharma of life in a pleasurable way. In Kavya Prakasha, Mamada also holds the same opinion. Poetry brings fame and riches, knowledge of the ways of the world, and relief from evils, and counsel sweet as from the lips of a beloved consort. According to Abhinavagupta, what lies in fact beneath the pleasing veneer of aesthetic emotion is undoubtedly a very strong desire to instruct the readers. For him, rasa is a sugar-coated pill for the young princes who are neither educated in scripture nor have received any instruction from history. Abhinava observes, princes who are not educated in scripture, Those words of Shruti and Smriti which consist in commands like those of a master to do this or that, and who have not received instruction from history, which like a friend reveals to us the connection of cause and effect, with such persuasive instances like this result came from such an act, and who are therefore in pressing need of instruction, for they, given the power to accomplish the wants of their subject, can be given instruction in the four goals of man only by our entertaining into their hearts. And what enters into the heart is the relish of rasa, swada, or the imaginative experience of emotion. Now, since this rasa is brought about by the union of the vibhavas and their related factors, a union which is invariably connected with instruction in the four goals of man, it follows that the subjection of a man to the relishing of the rasas by a literary construction of the vibhavas, etc., appropriate to rasa, serves at the same time for the instruction that naturally results. In this way, literary delight is an aid to instruction. In Sahitya Darpana, Vishwanatha opines that even a dumb head will be morally enlightened through their education or consumption of kāvya. He says, since the attainment of the fruits consisting of the class of four, that is, the four great objects of human desire, such as merit, wealth, enjoyment, and liberation, is pleasantly possible even in the case of those of slender capacity. By means of poetry only, therefore, its nature shall be now set forth. In Sringara Prakasha, Bhoja also declares, a literary artifact should be understood as a combination of sentences that informs us as to what we should do and we should not do. So far, we have been talking about the history of reader in Sanskrit poetics. In the next video, we will be talking about Bharata's observations about the idea of reader in his Natyashastra. Then we will wind up this session on reader. I hope you have understood this lesson. Thank you.